based on cheap sophistry. They've chosen to run a cheap scare campaign on debt, to interchange the figures of between gross and net debt when it suits them, to talk about when the Howard government was in office to refer to net debt, but when the Rudd government is in office to refer to gross debt. What a ridiculous approach to take, to treat the Australian people like mugs, to say to the Australian people, you can't understand these complex economic equations, you can't understand the reason for Australia needing to go into deficit, you wouldn't understand the fact that revenues have been written down, so we'll engage in a cheap scare campaign. Now, the problem with that, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that it does not stand up to a skerrick of analysis. And the threadbare nature of this argument was made particularly clear, I thought, in a very good opinion piece today in the Fin Review. And you might say, who wrote it? Who wrote this opinion piece? Which individual wrote it? Well, there was no individual. It was, if you like, an open letter from some of the most credible and respected economists in Australia. People like Fred Argy, like Tony Cole, like Sol Eslake, like Bernie Fraser, John Freeburn, Stephen Koukoulas, Andrew Lee, John Quiggin, Mike Withers. The list goes on. All names honourable members will be familiar with as very eminent Australian economists. Very eminent Australian. Does the Shadow Treasurer disagree that these are eminent economists? Bernie Fraser, he says, Bernie Fraser, the former Governor of the Reserve Bank and former Secretary of the Treasury. What would he know? What would he know? So a list of economists, I haven't counted them, probably 20 economists, and the Shadow Treasurer says, Bernie Fraser. What would he know? Some of the 20 most credible economists in the country. And this is what they've had to say. There is no more effective way to stimulate the economy quickly. They're referring to the government's actions. No more effective way to stimulate the economy quickly. The success of this measure can be seen in the relative strength of Australian retail sales compared with almost any of our peers. In addition, the government plans to spend many billions more on infrastructure. Now, that was before today's figures, before they were aware of today's figures. This was just based on retail trade figures. Now, they are further supported by economic growth figures. And they conclude by saying this: deploying our strong balance sheet to use otherwise idle resources, or to put it more compellingly, deserted factories and unemployed workers to build assets that improve our lives and our economy in the future seems much more appealing, much more commonsensical than retreating into phobias. What an eloquent way of putting it. Not only putting the argument in a very sound economic framework, but putting it in a human framework. Pointing out that unless the Australian government acted and stimulated the economy, we'd have deserted factories. We'd have more households led by unemployed. We'd have unemployment much higher than it is. The opposition are fond of saying, it's not your money. You're spending money that's not your money. Well, it's not our jobs we're protecting either. It's the jobs of our constituents. It's the jobs of the people who rely on us to see us through this global crisis. It's not your jobs and it's not our jobs. It's the jobs of the Australian people. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, they're the jobs they're the people who are relying on us to see it through. They're the people who are relying on us to say that the global recession is the worst in 75 years, but we will see it through. We will do whatever it takes to stimulate the economy, to ensure that we will protect jobs. And in a fleeting flicker of honesty this morning, the Shadow Treasurer admitted that the government's actions have supported jobs. So there are, Madam Deputy Speaker, more tough times to come. We're not through this. This isn't the end of the global recession. Today's figures aren't a cause for celebration across the land, but they're an indication that we're getting through. They're an indication, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we are seeing the worst of the global crisis and we are getting through better than anybody else. Now, there are tough times to come, and there are tougher times to come, and we do expect unemployment to rise more. But we're better off with a government to get us through these tough times which is prepared to take action. We're better off with a government that is prepared to engage in a conversation with the Australian people about the challenges facing us. We're better off with a government that is prepared to say we need a deficit and we don't apologise for protecting and supporting jobs. We're better off with a government that is prepared to take the tough decisions, rather than the cheap opportunists who now sit opposite, who have thrown away all their economic credibility that they would say they built up over 11 years, thrown it away in a cheap attempt to score political points in the face of this, the gravest economic crisis facing the nation. The Australian people know that they are better off with a government of realists rather than a government of opportunists. And not only do the Australian people know it, every economic commentator in the country knows it, to paraphrase a leader of the opposition. Every credible economist and economic writer in the country knows that the opposition's argument is laid threadbare. It's threadbare for all to see, and their credibility lies in tatters. For 12 months they've flailed around trying to find a coherent economic argument. For 12 months they've changed from position to position. They said to start with, well, we support the first economic stimulus package, and then they said, oh, it's not working. We're seeing unemployment go up, we're seeing economic growth again, it's not working, we now oppose it. Then we had the second economic stimulus package, and they said we don't support that, we support tax cuts instead. The Shadow Treasurer's predecessor said we support broad and sweeping tax cuts which will reduce the deficit, just before she got dumped as Shadow Treasurer, unsurprisingly. But a view which has not been disassociated by the current Shadow Treasurer, that they would actually support broad and sweeping tax cuts, which would increase the deficit and increase debt. And now they've settled on the argument that the debt and deficit are too high. They've settled on the cheap argument that Australia is in too much debt. We'll ignore Australia's debt levels compared to the rest of the world. We'll ignore the size of the deficit compared to the rest of the world. We'll ignore the fact that government's brought down a deficit less than 5% of GDP when the average for advanced countries around the world is 9%. We'll ignore all that. We'll run a cheap argument. Well, in these difficult times, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Australian people look not only to the government for leadership, they look to the parliament for leadership. And what they see from this side is leadership, and what they see from that side is cheap opportunism.